Well, the party is off to a good start.
His big sister, he's escorting.
Really shorty.
John has come here from Canada, Nova Scotia, and it's the icing on the cake for me to have family.
That's great to hear.
There are two items that I want to cover with you, and if I could just ask to be a bit quiet. One wonderful human being, his name was Colin Michael Day. He's the son of my former colleague on the board, who also served as the chair of the board, Mike Day, and he's here tonight. His only son passed away unexpectedly like 3 weeks ago. And we want to acknowledge that he produced a film called Nocturnal that was featured in our 2020 UK Ireland Cinema Showcase. I personally knew Colin in London, where he was living and working, and he was a guy who would walk into a room and just take it over. He was kind of a Cary Grant in flip-flops. He was tall, he was pale, he was handsome, he was smart, and he was funny. Sadly, I was 30 years older than he was.
Let that stop you.
Yeah, well, never. Who's that wise guy who said that? They said, don't let it stop you, Sheila. Anyway, and Mike is here tonight, and I would like to ask in honor of his son that we observe a moment of silence in memory of Colin Michael Day. Please. May he rest in peace. Okay, now, for somebody who is so eminent, has deigned to come tonight only because I have this year put a whiskey bar in, the eminent Ron Henderson, who founded the Denver Film Festival. And I was lucky enough to meet him when he had dark hair. And I'm here to tell you it was a sight to see. He was running what looked like a boiler room for a back office of a Wall Street cheapo thing. None of us got paid a penny. And I was introduced to him one afternoon by a woman friend who said, you've really got to meet Ron Henderson. And I said, who? And he's starting up a film festival. And I said, in Denver? 1978 Denver was nothing like now. The first place I was taken to was brunch on Sunday in Morrison, Radio Free Morrison. And we're at Sunday brunch, and it's got about 2 pounds of meat, all burned to a crisp, a couple of hard red eggs. And we're sitting there, and everybody's drinking beer, and it's like 10:30 in the morning. I got used to that later, but anyway. And suddenly, in this little bar restaurant, 2 guys come in on horseback and go over to the bar and ask for some beer. And they get their beer, and they turn the horses around, and they leave. And I think, this is a different place than where I was coming from. Anyway, it was in that environment that Ron bravely and very imaginatively thought, Denver, what a good place to create a cultural new adventure. And I'm going to do it with all volunteers and my own work and sweat and tears and everything. And he pulled it off. And I wrote the liner notes. He said, because I was introduced to him, and he said, who are you? And I said, I'm a friend of Marilyn's. And he said, what do you do? And I said, well, I work for the city with programs for the elderly. Oh, good. We got a couple of films about old people. Write the liner notes. And that's it. I mean, no kidding. And here I am trying to write liner notes. Well, 46 years later, we are thriving. And if any of you were lucky enough to be at the opening night last night at the Opera House, I mean, we have a revive. This is big. I went to Telluride for 35 years, and I never saw an opening night that would touch what we had yesterday. So kudos to Mr. Henderson, and I'm asking him to say a couple of words, please.
I wanted to say something about Colin. I've known Mike and Pam for several years, but I only met Colin 3 times. But after the first time, I felt like we were best friends. He had that kind of personality, that kind of presence. He was very open. He was passionate. We both shared a love for film and sports. And I felt very much kindred spirit with him. The second time I met him was at the Berlin Film Festival. I was there scouting for films for Denver, and he and his producing partner were there trying to raise money for their film, Nocturne. And basically, all I could do was encourage him and promise him a platform if his film was successful. It was, and the second time I met him was at the screening at the Film Festival. We had a very enthusiastic audience, a great Q&A afterwards. And by the way, Nocturnal is a great film. The last time I saw Colin was at a lunch. Mike was there, he set it up. I was trying to help him find a U.S. distributor for the film. And finding a distributor for an independent film is kind of like raising money for an independent film. It's very difficult. But I mainly, I know that Colin was a great tennis player. He and Mike were in father-son tournaments and in pickup soccer games on Sunday. But I knew him as a film artist and as a director, actor, producer, and I can't believe he's gone. We miss him very much. And Mike, deepest condolences for you and Pam. Anyway, we've got a lot of more good films to watch here, and this in the next 10 days, so enjoy the festival.
each have contributed so much to the enjoyment. And now we're going to go on to the second phase of the evening, and I'm not going to preempt what I'll say briefly at the theater, but it's been wonderful to have you here. And there was one other thing I wanted to say. If you didn't get one of these snazzy posters, these cards, on the back are the other 5 films that are part of UK Ireland. 2 of them I have done in conjunction with the esteemed Will Lamont as part of Cinema Cube. And that's the new thing for us. Yay! Yay! So please support UK Ireland and see some of the other films in the lineup. And it's got the dates, the title, the times, and it's handy and you can put it in your bra or something. And aren't I adorable?
Welcome to the C Film Center. This is Denver Film's year-round home. We're so happy to have you all here. We've got a really special evening for you tonight. This is a great film. It's potentially Ken Loach's last film. We'll see. Hopefully not. It's just one of those films that's a great reminder of, you know, we are much more alike than we are different. And I think those little acts of kindness along the way really can do a lot more than you kind of think that they can. But really tonight, this film is a part of our Sheila K. O'Brien Spotlight. I'd like to bring down the star of the show, Miss Sheila, who is one of our great donors, supporters, board members. Please welcome Sheila K. O'Brien.
Thank you all for coming. I want to mention 2 personal observations about this film. First of all, Ken Loach. I first met him in the, I believe, 1980s in Telluride. And he and I were walking along the spring, you know, that skirts, sorry, I keep, you'd think I'd be used to this by now. And he's a little guy. And he was, he kept stopping to look at every leaf and every flower. And I thought he was like maybe an outpatient or something. I didn't know it was him. And finally I realized it was him. I thought, I've seen him. I've even heard his voice because he started talking to the plants. So I approached him. I introduced myself and I told him how much I loved the film that he did called Raining Stones. And I was so touched by it because I was raised relentlessly in the Roman Catholic Church. And when I got to be 6.5 and it was going to be communion year, my family didn't have much money. My brother John, who I'm so thrilled to hear from Canada. Let's hear it for John. They didn't have the 80 pounds for a communion kit. And this is like with the veil and the shoes and the socks and the dress and everything and the prayer book. And she had a friend make me a communion dress, and she was a Syrian refugee named Mrs. Zaloom. Her daughter Barbara and I went to school together. And she made me an absolutely beautiful dress, which I hated. I was the belle of the ball, but I wasn't one of those crinoline ones that all the Italian girls wore. And I was tall. I was lanky. I was biggish. And they were all tiny, you know, size 4. Hate them. Anyway, I have a photograph that was taken of me in that dress that I hated, that probably Mrs. Zaloom did for free. And it's timeless. It's beautiful. But when you're a kid, you don't differentiate between what is real and what is not. And I never forgot that, and I especially had never heard of the word Syria. And one day I got Mrs. Zaloom to talk to me about how she wound up in New Jersey. And so I always had a special affection for Syria because Mrs. Zaloom and her family had come to live in Patterson, New Jersey. many years later, in the 1990s, I went on a pilgrimage with the American Cathedral of Paris to Syria, and I was there for almost 3 weeks. And we went from the southern tip all the way up to Aleppo. And if I could give an analogy in America, Damascus is like Washington, D.C., although in its better days. And Aleppo is the New York of Syria. And it had wonderful mixes of cultures, including Armenians, who are incredibly wealthy, were anyway. And I loved Aleppo. And I'm not a practicing Christian. I'm a Christian in ethics, but I don't go to church. And they went to Mass like every day, the American Cathedral of Paris. And I would sit in the back trying not to be seen. And they were shunning me until we went to the souk. And guess what? I became the designated shopper in the souk. And I got deals for them. And those Christians started loving me like there was no tomorrow. Buying the rugs, buying the soaps, buying everything. And I just had such a passion for Aleppo. And when it was bombed to smithereens, it just broke my heart. And you are all aware of what's going on right now, which is incredibly dangerous for everybody, for us. You know, this thing could really go. Well, it's already gone, but I mean, it could escalate even further. And that's why I think this film is so timely, because tribal hatreds just eat away at people's decency. And this film is about trying to come to terms and live peaceably with people who are very different than you, or, you know, your ethos. And I find that's just such a difficult ambition to get. Seems like the whole world is angry at the rest of the world. And I hope that this film might inaugurate in all of our minds what might be possible. And I'm particularly affected because the female progenitor in the film is a Syrian young woman who had ambitions to be a photographer. And I'll close by saying one thing. When we were in Homs, which was Assad, not the current Assad, but his father, killed 30,000 people in that town for an insurrection against him about in the 1980s. And I was there feeling very depressed about it because there were big murals with guys with kids with machine guns and tanks and all that. I mean, Homs never got over the 30,000, and they were furious, just simmering with hatred against the regime. And a school let out, and it was a Christian school, and this little girl came out. And somebody once told me, in another remote place I had pilgrimaged, he said, if you want to know the quality of the government and the condition of the people, look at the children. And this little girl came out, her hair was shiny, she was wearing a uniform, she had a backpack with books teeming out of it. And she came up to me and she thought I was French. And so she spoke to me in French. And she was very shy, but she wanted to know, was her French good enough that I could understand it? And I replied in French. And I looked at her, and she was maybe 10. And I can't tell you how many times I've thought about whatever happened to that little girl. She'd be 40 now, I think. Late 30s, 40. Did she ever have kids? Did she ever get married? Did she ever travel? Did she ever have a career? And that one person, to me, personified the incredible loss that happens, especially to the children, when we have these endless wars. I was born during World War II, and the whole 40s was my uncles who fought in the war, my father who fought in the war, coming back from war, then Korea, later Vietnam. I can't remember an extended time in my entire life where we weren't at war with somebody somewhere. And I'm just hoping that we can move beyond this and have more future for our children and the next generations, and peace, which seems so out of reach right now. So I hope the old oak can give an example of what might be possible and inspire all of us. And I'm so grateful that you're here. And I want to mention one other thing. The Denver staff has been brilliant in the parties and the film lineup, Matt Campbell, the lineup, Kevin's leadership, and I'm very grateful. And I'm very happy that you are supporting the UK Ireland. One other thing, there's a postcard in which I am stylishly presented. And on the back are the other films that are part of the UK Ireland. And I'm hoping you'll take a look and go and see some of them. They're really quite wonderful films. That's it. I'm out. Bye.